there, it's spiritual psychic Cynthia Killian here, also known as Psychic Cynthia. And welcome to my Psychic Cynthia YouTube channel, and welcome to today's video, which is dealing with Mercury retrograde goes direct. Yay! Thank goodness. And hopefully you've heard of Mercury retrograde by now. Today, on the day that I'm making this video, I am still in a Mercury retrograde time, but tomorrow Mercury will go direct. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, if you don't know what Mercury retrograde means, you should head on over and watch my other video about that, or just do a quick Google search and you can find out more info. But basically, Mercury goes retrograde about 3, maybe sometimes 4 times a year, but usually 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time. And when that happens, well, a whole bunch of stuff breaks loose, and basically the ease with which things happen disappears. Everything becomes a little bit more difficult, and it's like sort of like walking in molasses trying to get things done. And there are many miscommunications, and there is an upside to Mercury retrograde, and I do explore that in the video on Mercury retrograde proper. So check that out if you want to know more about that and how to really gel with the energies of Mercury retrograde. But for today, we're talking about Mercury going direct. And the important thing to understand is that before the energies really return back to quote unquote normal, in other words, before things become easy again, efficient again, natural again, the planet Mercury will station. You'll hear this too. You'll hear and you'll see in print, Mercury stations direct. You also hear it at the beginning of the retrograde, Mercury stations retrograde. And what that means, I mean, there's an actual phenomenon here. Understand that this phenomenon of Mercury retrograde, I mean, it's not just a made-up thing. I mean, it's something you can observe if you have a telescope or into astronomy and not just astrology. All retrograde phenomenon has to do with the speed of a planet. And whether we're talking about Mercury, or we're talking about Saturn or Venus or Uranus, I mean, basically, when you're speaking of a retrograde, what you're saying is that the orbit of that planet has slowed down. And then, of course, as astrologers, we talk much more about how the reduction in the speed of that planet's orbit has effects for those of us on Earth, emotional effects, energetic effects, in some cases, physiological effects. So just keep that in mind, that retrograde means slowing down. When I make these videos or write things about it and I say Mercury retrograde is a time to slow down, I'm not just being cutesy and new agey, okay? It truly is a time to slow down, because as above, so below, right? You've heard that ancient saying, as above, so below. Well, here you have this planet that is relatively close to the Earth, slowing down in its orbit 3 times a year, occasionally 4. And when that happens, that is a time for those of us to slow down on Earth and take it easy. And we can do that voluntarily, or we can have that enforced upon us by things that happen. So before it enters the retrograde proper, and retrograde just actually has to do with that planet moving at a much slower speed than its normal quote-unquote orbit. But the orbit has to slow down ahead of time before it moves into the retrograde zone. And then there is a moment in time where it's just hardly moving at all before the retrograde. And that is called station and stationing retrograde. Okay, so that's why there's a station at the beginning of the retrograde. And then at the end of the retrograde, there's another station where the orbit of the planet actually appears to stand still. So when you hear that phrase, Mercury stations, it could be Saturn stations, could be Uranus stations, but more likely you'll hear people talking about Mercury, because that is a retrograde that is very easy to see the effects and feel them. So when you hear me or another astrologer or another person saying Mercury stations direct or Mercury stations retrograde, I want you to understand that stations equals standstill. Okay? So tomorrow, on the day that I'm making this video, tomorrow Mercury will station direct. So it's going to hit that standstill point at the end of the retrograde. And what that means is from that day forward, tomorrow, the orbit of the speed of the speed of the orbit of Mercury will start to pick up again. And eventually it will reach more of a normal rate. Now that doesn't happen overnight. And that's why you'll notice that if you are really paying attention to these retrograde cycles and following the dates, you'll notice, and I've noticed, and lots of people have made this observation, that a lot of times some of the most stressful things seem to happen within 48 hours of the station, especially the station direct. And you would think that once it just goes direct that, everything is better again, right? Yay, everything's easy again. Well, it's not quite that easy. I mean, if you think about it, what that planet has to do is sort of slam on its brakes and move at in a different direction. Actually, it's moving at a different speed. But it feels like the energies suddenly have to slam on their brakes and move in a different direction again. So Mercury direct is wonderful. It is the return towards equilibrium, but it is a gradual return. And the actual moment, the actual day of the stationing direct is a time of standstill, and often a time of very chaotic energies, chaotic and unpredictable. Because in that moment where there is a standstill in the orbit of Mercury, there's a standstill of the energies. This is very much I would almost call it a luminal moment, a moment where anything can happen. I mean, that's quite wonderful. Anything can happen, but often some crazy things happen, okay? So, I'm not a fatalist. I just want you to understand that the energies are going to gradually return back to normal. Now that Mercury has stationed, or will soon station direct, it's not an overnight phenomenon. And really what you're looking for, okay, if you're looking to start a new project or to move forward in a big way, or you're just wondering, when will efficiency return? When will things be easy again? And when will, you not feel like you're walking in molasses or having so many misunderstandings? When will that time return? Well, generally, because remember, standstill equals stationary, stationary equals standstill. So generally that time of greater ease starts to really return, not at the moment the Mercury stations direct, but about a week later, give or take a day or two on either side, about a week later, when Mercury leaves what's called its post-retrograde storm. And the post-retrograde storm is simply what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about the amount of time it takes for the planet to regain the speed of its normal orbit. So that's what we're really looking for here. For example, for the Mercury retrograde period that I'm making this video for, Mercury will turn direct on March 28th, that's tomorrow. But the post-retrograde storm is not over until April 6th, which is about 7 days later. No, excuse me, that's a little bit more than 7 days actually, about 8 or 9 days in this case, because it turns direct on a Thursday and the storm's not over until a week later, Saturday. So there's going to be an adjustment time here. But I don't know about you. I mean, I myself, the moment that Mercury turns back direct, the moment it stations, I should say, I start to feel a little bit different. And especially in the days immediately after that, I can feel the return gradually to an easier energy. However, the station is not technically direct yet, even though we say it stations direct. What that means is it's at a standstill, moving towards direct. Got it? So anyway, I'm so much looking forward to this particular Mercury retrograde ending. I don't know if you've noticed, but some retrograde periods seem harder than others. Sometimes it just seems harder for everybody, okay? And we're all saying, oh yes, this was a hard one. Sometimes it just seems harder for some people and easier for others. I think this one has been a very difficult Mercury retrograde period for many. And maybe this has to do with Mercury being in the sign of Pisces, which is not, a real harmonious sign for Mercury to be in, because Pisces is so emotional and intuitive based. And while Mercury may have an intuitive side, it is more logical. So even when Mercury is direct in Pisces, they don't always get along so well. Although I think if you have that in your natal chart, that could give you great powers of perception in the psychic realm. But that's a story for another day. In any case, just know that the energies are returning back to smooth forward movement gradually. On the other hand, don't be in a hurry to go run out and undertake major projects yet. If you're watching this at a time when Mercury is just about ready to turn direct, take small steps forward, okay? And I myself am getting ready to do that. I'm getting ready to change email newsletter providers, and I'm starting in on that process. But I'm not making the conversion quite yet. I'm going to wait certainly until after Mercury goes direct tomorrow, and maybe a few days yet. I'm working quietly in the background, just like I always tell you all to do, working on some things that can be in preparation for the major change. So that's what I would recommend for you too, and to just keep tidying up loose ends and, as they say, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, and double check everything. And listen, if you have some people in your life who are a little bit, imbalanced or overly dramatic, they tend to get easily triggered. You might want to hang low from them for a few days after the, planetary station happens, after Mercury stations direct, because they could be very easily triggered by this planetary station. It's sort of like similar in its intensity to a full moon or an equinox. I'm not saying it's the same phenomenon, understand, but it is very much similar energetically in the strong emotions and energies it can bring up in us. And those emotions are coming up to be cleansed. As I talk about in the Mercury retrograde video proper, whatever comes up, it needs to be released. It's there so you can look at it and face it and release it. But if a person is not on that conscious path of facing one stuff and dealing with it, then it just sort of spews out into the environment, right? So if you have any people around you like that, or if you tend to be that way yourself, let's be honest, maybe some of you watching this tend to be that way. Maybe you tend to be the dramatizer in your world. Well, if that's the case, you can't get away from yourself. So you just have to deal with your own stuff, okay? And maybe find some ways to calm it down for the next few days. I don't know what you need to do that. I know what I do. I know that I drink a lot of green tea. That's what I'm drinking now. And that really helps me to stay mellow. Plus, it has a little bit of caffeine, but not too much. I like herbal tea. That helps me to relax. So, and actually, I mentioned some herbal teas in the Mercury retrograde video. So go back and watch that if you want to know what ones specifically I suggest. Pretty much any one that you like, okay? If it's a relaxing herbal tea that you like, by all means, avail yourself of that in the next few days. All of us should be doing that. And then, the great thing about things like relaxing teas or warm baths or having a retreat. I like to take a spiritual retreat, and it's a good time to do it during Mercury retrograde, except for traveling is not so favored. So I don't know. Maybe you just have your home spa, okay? That's probably the best for the next few days. And treat yourself, relax yourself, and give yourself just a little extra nourishment so you'll be prepared to move forward once the energies are truly moving forward again in about a week or so after Mercury goes back direct. Thanks for taking the time to visit with me and sharing in a nice cup of tea. If you found this information helpful, please do click the subscribe button down below, and you can also follow me on Facebook. Until next time, bright blessings to you all, and may the cosmic light of Mercury shine down upon you and be gentle for you and your loved ones.